Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome back again. And today we are going to have a little review of our previous lesson, and we're going to follow on with this topic related to this concept. So last time we have discussed regarding that how economies work, and we learned that the economies will work when the goods and services are flowing, or maybe how they are actually flowing, the level of goods and services, how they are moving from one end to another. Then this will represent as the economies work. So if you could just see into this diagram which was illustrated last time, or just for a recap, I'm drawing this again for you, and then we will extend our today's topic. So we have households and the firms, and from the households, they are providing the resources to the firm, and these firms are making goods and services which are returned to the households who make consumer expenses. Those expenses become the income for the or revenue for the firms, and the firm return to the factors who have provided their services in the shape of factor payment, and the factor payments such as like rent, wages, interest, and profits. And moreover, this was the simple economy model, how the simple economy works. And moreover, we learned about two more economies. That includes closed economy, which includes the savings and investments. Savings and investments. These were the two components when we move from simple economy to the closed economy. The closed economy where there is no international trade and there is no government intervention. And the last was when there is an open economy, where the open or free trade is existing in the shape of import and exports, and along with that the taxes and the government intervention in the shape of government expenses, they are also happening. So it means in one way we can say that there are three types of economies: the simple model, closed economy, and the open economy. And some economists, they also use some or divide the economies into four classes. They use like as that there are two sector economies, three sector, and four sector economies. This is another way to explain that there can be economies divided into two sector, three sector, and four sector. And let's find out what are the two sector and three and four sectors. So they're not different than the one which we have learned previously, but only the distribution and the classification is slightly different over here. Now, if we just see this diagram over here, we can see that this side where we see the saving, taxes, and imports, which are also written in the short form with letter S for the savings, T for taxes, M for imports, investment with I, government expenses with G, and export with X. So we are going to take some of them and we are going to put it over here. Okay, in the two sector economy, we usually see the two variables: saving and investments. See the investment and saving. Now, this is popularly known as the two components which would fall in the two sector economy. Like if the economy is working and if there is only two things, that is investment, savings going on, and there is no government expenses, no taxes, no international trade in the shape of import and exports, then it's going to be only considered as two sector economy. Okay, along with this I, we usually add one more component, which is C on both sides. Now, what does this C stands for? This C is actually the consumer expenses, the consumer expenditure. Obviously, this is also the part of the where the economy is flowing. Like this is something where the economy is actually starting. Like if we just discuss about the simple economy, where there is no any saving, taxes, imports, or investment, government expenses, and exports, that is a simple economy. And that simple economy is depending on the consumption or consumer expenditure or consumer spendings. So that's why that consumer spending is shown with letter C, consumption. So we are putting it on the both side because it goes for both the households and the firms together. But when we move to the two-sector economy or the closed economy, that is something when we are adding one I with this consumption and one S with this C or consumption. This is savings and this is investment. So investments or consumption plus investment is equal to consumption plus saving. This is known as your two-sector economy. Now when we are moving to the three-sector, we are adding one more variables over here. Then this C plus I is going to be added with the next, and that is taxes or government expenditure. So with investment, we saw government expenses over there, so we can write letter G on this side of the equation. C plus I plus G or consumption, investment, and the government spending is actually the part of the three-sector economy. Three-sector means like a type of that economy in which these three variables are actually working to produce goods and services. Okay, what about on this side? It's going to be C plus S plus T. Why we are putting T over here? We know that if the government or in the economy, the government has to interfere. If they are making expenses, the government expenses, how they will be paid by? It's going to be paid by the taxes what it receives from this flow of national income or the output. So we are adding T over here and the government spending on this side. So these three variables on both sides, the economists term it as three-sector economy. The last one. In the last one, we are going to see add the last two remaining. It's going to turn into C plus I plus G plus X. The X is for export. And on this side, it's going to be C plus S plus T plus M. Okay, now this is the equation of the complete economy, dear students. The complete economy is where we have all those sectors or those people who are actually becoming the reason to increase the level of goods and services. And that is the four-sector economy, including consumption of the households and the firm, the investment by the producer, the government spending, and its exports. And on the other side, this side is actually giving the reason for increasing of this. Okay, so if we want to solve it further, how we can do that? At the maths, we do know that this C can be extracted with each other. And further to this, we can write this in the shape of I plus G plus X, S plus T plus M. So we are left with these two sides of the equation. Now, dear students, one thing which to be noted over here, that out of these two, there is one thing which is actually increasing the level of output. And one of them is actually decreasing the level of goods and services in the economy. In other words, the income which could be generated in the economy by producing these goods and services, either it's going to reduce or either it's going to increase. So economists usually give some names to these two sides. This side is usually known as the injections of economy. And this one is known as withdrawal or economy. Withdrawals. The one which could be like reducing the level of income in the economy. Now, what this equation stands for, this is usually known as a country's national income or output. The national income. We are yet to start this right after we finish with this. Our next content is the national income, which I'm going to start if the time allows today. So, from these output which could be produced, this is your national income, and the national income with this equation shows the equilibrium of the national income. Now, the national income equilibrium, where does it stand? Where this side is equal to this, and what do we name them? The injections are equal to its withdrawals. So when the injections and withdrawals are equal, it means the national income of the economy is in equilibrium. For example, if I just take example over here, if the consumption is 5, it's 5 over here, and if we are receiving like 10 savings from households, and this 10 is invested as 10, it has been lent out to people for investment. So it means that the economy is in the equilibrium. The two-sector economy is in the equilibrium. And we will always, the economics is always referring and preferring that the situation should be in equilibrium. It will never ever look into the disequilibrium, because disequilibrium brings inefficiency. So economics is actually which always teaches us that how we can gain equilibrium and balance. So the national income, which shows the national output or the goods and services for the whole economy, since it's the part of the macroeconomics, so we are assuming that these two are the elements which are actually has to be in equilibrium. For example, if a country's injections are greater than withdrawals, which means that this side is greater than this. So what does this thing means? This means that your national income is actually increasing more with lesser available of savings, taxes, and imports. Imagine if you import less, but you are producing more in value terms. That means that your national income level is greater. So this is how we can explain and understand that if the country needs to increase its national income, it has to increase more injections. Okay, so for those who are still not able to understand, let me draw a diagram for you, and this might help us to understand better. Okay, look at this diagram at the moment. If you just see that this diagram is actually showing a space where we have a flow of water into a hose, and this is showing a drainage. Just imagine that this is something which can be reflected as withdrawal of the flow. And let's suppose this is the water which it contains due to the shower or whatever you say, maybe a flow of water. So this flow is known as an injection. So just imagine if the injections are greater, if the flow of the flow of the injections is more than the withdrawal, so definitely this will be overflow. So this overflow can be represented as a country's national income or the level of output. So the more injections means and the lesser withdrawal, that is going to result in more national income. This is the best way I can explain to you that how injections are going to be creating more national income in the economy. Let's suppose if there is more withdrawal and lesser injection, then the level of this water, which we are assuming as national income, is going to be lesser. Okay, so Introducing all these, so today's purpose was in our very first half of the lesson is to introduce some of the terminologies again and recall that how actually economy works and what are the things which could increase the level of goods and services and national income of the economy. So for that, letter I, G plus X and S plus T plus M has to be introduced to you all to understand that where in next our lesson we could use them together. Okay, and moving on to the further explanation of the sectors, we have two sectors, we have three sectors and four sector. Okay, now if we just move on or recall with our previous lesson, the two sector economy is also known as your closed economy, where we had investment and savings. But when we talk about three and four sector, we are actually talking about the open economy. So this is how we differentiate. We have closed economy, we have open economy, and if we have only C, then it is the simple economy, where the goods and services are produced on the basis of consumption. All right? Okay. So now moving to our more terminologies which we need to learn and which would be helpful to understand that how we can explain further and more macroeconomic topics such as like price stability, unemployment, or economic growth, and the balance of payment equilibrium. All these topics will be and can be explained with the help of these concepts altogether. These concepts are at the moment for you to understand, and later they will be also used to illustrate in our answers. So now let's move before we start with all those 4 or 5 macroeconomic objectives. Still, we are making a little base, and this base is actually going to help us to further find out that how economy actually, what are the various macroeconomic objectives and how they could be explained with the help of them. So my next target is to understand the word aggregate demand. Now, what is an aggregate demand? The aggregate means the total of anything. Aggregate is the total. So when we talk about the aggregate demand, we are talking about the aggregate demand of economy. So we need to know how to define it first. So aggregate demand is actually so the total product that is demanded on various prices in the economy. If we have various prices in the economy and how the total demand is actually product is demanded to produce, that is considered to be as aggregate demand of the economy. So when we talk about the aggregate demand of economy, one thing which strikes in our mind that maybe this is the demand just like the one which we studied previously. If we just see or compare with the demand which we studied previously was an individual demand of a consumer, a demand for a consumer for a particular product which they do. But over here, we are actually talking about the demand of the total product or production or output which is produced in a particular year, let's say, on a various prices in the economy. Okay, now, what are the contents which includes in it, or what do you think, what are the things which are actually demanding, which could increase the output There we are. Our answer is lying over here. All these four contents are known as the part of aggregate demand, or they are the components of aggregate demand. It's going to be C, consumption, plus investment, plus government spending, plus exports. So these are the part of aggregate demand, dear students. Now just imagine, if you want to increase the total product, what is that you're going to demand? Let's ask ourselves. If you are assigned that what are and how you could find out that if you demand to have more production, what are the things you need to have? So the answer is that you need to have the consumer's expenditure. How the consumer are making expenditure. So consumption is the first thing which is going to increase the production in your country. Just imagine if the consumer is not demanding, that means you cannot increase the demand of your country for the output or the total product. So if you need to increase it, you need to have consumer expenses. The consumer needs to be more spending in the economy. And that is going to increase a country's aggregate demand, which I am showing you with the letter A and D, aggregate demand. The next is investment. Now, this investment is actually also shown as the producer expense. The producer should be making expenses to produce something. When the producers or firms, they are demanding to produce something, and for that, what they need to do, they need to make expense, buying raw material, paying for the labor, and anything which would be made as or classified as producer expense or investment expenditure also, then this is going to increase the aggregate demand itself. Okay, the next in the line is the government spending or government expenses. If, let's say, a country's aggregate demand is not increasing, maybe the consumer is not willing to spend, maybe they have a lack of income, the producers are not spending since they don't have confidence in producing, maybe their goods might not be sold in the economy. We have another agent in this equation, that is government, and they will make some expenses. When they are going to make expenses, this is going to increase the aggregate demand of the economy. And when the aggregate demand increases, this is yet going to increase the level of output in your economy. Okay, so the last in this is, that is the foreign trade expenditure or export expenditure. Now, when we talk about the export expenditure, if we want to export something, we need to make expenditure, and when we are making expenditure, means that more output would be produced in the economy. But at the same time, we have to add one more thing over here, that when we are making trade, we are not only spending on exports, but when we are trying to export something, sometimes we need to make expenses on buying imported goods, like maybe a raw material, and that is going to be also the part of this equation. So that's why sometimes exports are subtracted from imports. Why? We need to find out that what is the difference. Like maybe you have bought a raw material for $5 and now you're selling it for $10 in abroad. So the difference is going to give you X minus M, or export minus imports. In other words, net exports. So net export is going to be another expenditure and the component of aggregate demand over here. So once again, if I just sum up this, the aggregate demand of the economy shows the total demand to produce of the goods and services on the various prices in the economy. And now in the last, how do we think that this could be shown graphically? You can also show this in the form of a graph, and usually we assume that it has a negative relationship with the price level. This is quantity. We can name it as a GDP, or let's say a real GDP. Now this topic is going to be discussed in our upcoming lessons, but at the moment, for your ease, I'm putting it as output Q. So it has a negative relationship, aggregate demand. We know that if the prices are high, then we will find lesser output available to be produced in the economy. Just imagine if the prices are high. Do we believe that the consumer are going to make more expenses? No, they are not. They are going to consume less. When they are consuming less, it means that the aggregate demand would fall on the curve. And you can see that if this is point A, and let's say this is point B, on both the diagram, if we have two price level from price 1 to P2, and the quantity is Q1 to Q2, this thing shows that if the prices are rising, we are finding lesser output to be produced. This is how it can be explained with the help of this curve. So moving from point B to A is mean that we are having lesser aggregate demand available due to the change in the prices. So the price is falling, the consumption is also falling. Let's suppose that the prices are increasing, the investment will also fall, since we have to make adjustment with the interest rates. And when the interest rates are by the increase in the prices, if the rate of interests are increasing, lesser will be investment and the quantity would also fall. So as far with the government spending, the more higher prices, the government will spend less, because government has lesser revenues with them and they have to manage that. Just imagine if you have a budget or to spend on the public goods, that means the more the prices you are producing, more the prices are charged, the government will have lesser amount to spend due to the increase in the prices. So the lesser output over here. And let's suppose if your prices are increasing of your goods, how could the export will be affected and the output would be reduced? If your products are expensive, they are pricey, then you cannot compete in the international market, and that is going to reduce the level of your output. And your aggregate demand will move on the curve and it will move from B to A. So this is your aggregate demand, dear students, and this is type of change is actually happening. Why? Due to the prices. So we all know that there are always two types of changes in any curve. So we have the price factor and then we have the non-price factor. So it affects over here as well. In this diagram, we see that this type of change is due to the price. The change is due to price. However, sometimes the prices are remaining same, but your aggregate demand also increases, like from 81 to 82. Maybe the price remains the same, but your output is actually increasing. How it is possible? How would you think that this is going to increase? So this is something which is other than the prices, and there are some factors which are actually considered while they are moving. And these factors are usually known as exogenous factors. Exogenous means something which is outside from any factor which is outside from this model. What is outside? It's other than the prices. For example, if the government decides that they have to spend every year on their particular projects, regardless if the prices are increasing or not. That is known as something which is an exogenous factor. But sometimes government expenditure are relying on prices as well. So those which are not influenced by the prices are known as exogenous factor. And if they are increasing, they are going to shift the curve. If they are increasing more expenditure, the aggregate demand should increase outward, means more output from Q1 to Q2. And let's say if they are reducing there, so it means it's going to move to the leftward. If this is the exogenous factors, and if we talk about the prices, this should be endogenous. Now, endogenous factors are those which are eventually affecting due to the prices, something which is or with the level of output. So the exogenous factors are like the government, which I said. It could be either due to the investment that the producers, regardless of the prices, they want to make investment to produce goods and services. If they are encouraged other than the prices, let's suppose if the interest rate is falling, the fall in the interest rate is going to affect its aggregate demand because the investment is going to increase. And when the investment is increasing, the curve should move from aggregate demand 81 to 82. And that means more investment means more output from Q1 to Q2. And same goes with the exports. Let's say the more people are having confidence in your economy and they want to trade with you. So this is something which could be maybe due to the political reason, having good ties with your neighborhood, or any other good reasons which could increase the level of your net exports. It's going to increase the aggregate demand outward. Okay, now summing up today's lesson, aggregate demand of the economy, which shows the total product of demand of its products in the economy on its various prices. These are the components which you see, and these components are actually changing due to the prices, which we could show in this diagram. The prices are changing, consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports are affected. And that is usually happening due to the endogenous factor. But when we talk about the exogenous, it means this is other than those which are outside the model and which is affected other than the prices. And that could be like increase in the consumption, maybe increase in the investment, any reason which could increase the government spending, any factor which could increase other than the prices in the net exports, it's going to be exogenous factor, and the curve would always shift either rightward or leftward, depending upon if that factor is contributing to produce goods and services or it's reducing the level of output. So that's it for the aggregate demand today. We are going to find out aggregate supply tomorrow. And with the help of these two, we are going to have at least understanding how the economy actually prevails in the form of or shape of an equilibrium. When we are done with this, in our very next classes, we will then start our macroeconomic objectives, and you will find out that these diagrams, which we are going to draw in this week, with the help of aggregate demand and with the help of aggregate supply, how we can relate every macroeconomic objective, or maybe we can explain them with the help of these diagrams. So thank you very much for today. There is no assignment today. I'll try again in the next class. We will have, when we are finished with this topic, and then we can share a worksheet for you, which you can attempt at home. Thank you very much.